the topic today is, what role does adult and community education play in the process of anti-racism? And it really is a space for input and reflection. Like, we have spaces, we always have discussion groups, but we can just use it as a space to reflect on what we've heard as well from Joy today. And Joy, in case people don't know, we're delighted that Joy-Tendai Kangere is facilitating this session. And Joy has been involved in the work of AONTAS for a number of years. And I'm going to pick out a couple of things that Joy has done. She's done a huge amount with us, but I'm thinking back to 2016, where Joy shared her story in our publication, I'm an Adult Learner, which was launched by the then Minister for Education and Skills, and you're at the Gresham, I remember it so well. And that particular story and Joy's story at that time is available through our publication online. Joy spoke at our AONTAS Lifelong Learning Advocacy Summer School, and that was hugely welcomed by all participants. She was also a speaker at our Lifelong Learning Summit last year, which reflected the 50 years of AONTAS. So in front of 250 people, she advocated with her heart and soul about the value of adult learning. Again, last year she was elected to our board with a huge mandate. And in terms of her bio, we could spend probably the rest of the call on that. But really, in terms of being an authentic advocate for adult learning, we're really honoured to have Joy as part of our organisation and as a leader on our board. She completed her Bachelor of Civil Law in UCD, was a Denham Fellow at the Honourable Society of King's Inn, has done a range of different leadership courses as well, and has also launched a new organisation, but maybe I'll leave Joy to say a bit more about that. But maybe just to talk a bit about the context about this. Really, it emerged, you know, following the killing of George Floyd and the civil rights protests. And we were thinking, like, as a civil society organisation, what's our obligation? You know, our obligation is around social justice and being in solidarity with those who experience oppression. So as part of that, it was a Monday, it was a bank holiday Monday, and I was seeing what was happening, and I just basically put down my reflections and kind of questioning our role in AONTAS and what should we be doing. We know we have an obligation to respond, but what should we do? I don't have the answers. It was, I suppose, initially as we're asking the questions. So when I reflected on this, I shared my thoughts with Joy, and really to challenge ourselves as an organisation. What are we doing, and are we doing enough? And through the different conversations that we had, which resulted in a blog article, which we were delighted that the UNESCO Institute of Lifelong Learning published, so we got to reach a broader audience. We tried to bring together our different perspectives. It was a conversation we started off at, but it became that blog. And while I was coming from the perspective that adult and community education has been influenced by great thinkers and advocates such as bell hooks around the decolonisation of learning, of processes of questioning education, you know, it was really beneficial for me to consider the hidden and unconscious bias that we have in adult and community education. We're not immune to that. And I think that the reflections of Joy in that article, and if you had the opportunity to read it, really highlighted that to me. So for me today, it's about a learning experience for us as an organisation. It's about listening, reflecting, and being mindful. It's also about being careful about how we use chat, how we create a really inclusive and supportive space, both for Joy and for everybody, whether it's members or people who haven't been engaged in the organisation. And that we ask ourselves these really important questions, and ask ourselves questions about race and racism, and what is our role in civil society and in the adult and community education community that we're in. To respond to this. So it's in that spirit and the support and solidarity that I would ask Joy to facilitate this session. So I will hand over to yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Niamh, for that wonderful introduction. I think Niamh has said a lot, just bar the last of the new initiative that I've co-founded, which is called Rooted in Ireland and Africa. And basically we dealing with anti-racism and encouraging understanding of the African continent. So I will go, the spirit of this talk is in the spirit of the learner voice, in which AONTAS really looks into, and it will be those experiences of the learner voice and in the art of storytelling. Racism, the past 2 weeks have been phenomenal. We've seen the world change, and a lot of things have been brought up from the past, and I would call it current events mirroring past systemic racial abuses. And that is, we'll call it what it is, that everything that has been on the fore, from enslavement to colonization to everyday microaggressions, have just blown up, and we're dealing with the facts. So I will start, if Emma, if you could maybe move to the next slide, please. Before we heard of George Floyd, before we heard of Breonna Taylor, America has been riddled by a lot of racism, ingrained in the distinction of who is who by their skin color. Things started heating up. The last 2 weeks have just not been focused on George Floyd. They basically have been a culmination of a long list of people that have been brutally killed by the police. And I have two people that have stood out for me. Breonna Taylor, because she's a woman and because her case or her story is not really widely in the paper, and she was killed, riddled with bullets in her own flat while her boyfriend was trying to protect them. There was inconsistencies in the coming into the room, into the house, and that has now, George Floyd's investigation has put a spotlight. But before that, we would also have heard of Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed as a suspect of a burglary, which was proven that he was not the person that they were looking for. And now we'll focus on George Floyd. I think everyone in the world has now heard or knows who George Floyd is. And I was heartened to see an Irish artist do a mural of him in Kingswood, Tala. And it shows the power that it's normally, changes are not because of anyone. It takes a simple person to change the world. And the process that we've seen is that we've had two pandemics in one go. We've started dealing with two pandemics, from COVID, which is a new virus that that we know that has affected everyone globally, to the old virus that has always been there but has been hidden, and that is the old virus of white privilege and racism. And I will go into that more. I'll just move on to the next slide, please, Emma. When speaking to people in the US, mostly they say that the straw that broke the camel's back, to be honest, with everything, was Karen, the lady, Amy Cooper, who has now been dubbed Central Park Karen, and that's in inverted commas, in which she was videoed calling the police and saying that she was under threat when her life was not threat. And what stood out is that they actually say that it was her description of the person that was threatening her, an African-American person. To those that are not aware, what that brings out is that it's the violence that is associated by a person of color, or especially a Black person. We've heard that people would go, if you see in terms of experiences of people in Ireland, is example, getting onto a bus and no one wanting to sit next to you on the bus, or walking down the street and people clutch their bags as if, Black is associated with theft, or going into a supermarket and the security following you, or actually you could actually feel his breath behind your back just because you're Black. So these are the things that people have to deal with, regardless of which part of the world you are, as long as you have a Black, the skin color Black, that is going to follow you. Yes, it worked. It is where we are. I mean, this is all coming in from the United States. It's flawed. And now we look at our own problems. Ireland, sorry, Emma. The next slide, please. we haven't had, we're not lacking in our own problems. There was the 15-year-old schoolboy, Toisi Shitabi. He was killed in Tyrrellstown, in Blanchardstown, and the people that murdered him were not, it's been because of his race, and the people that did commit the crime were found not guilty. And there were protests about it, about the equality, and about how the case was handled. So besides the incidences that have not been reported, we also have that. And we've seen from Colin Kaepernick taking the knee that in protesting things that are the inequalities caused by race, there are there's backlash. Colin Kaepernick has not been able to work, but it's good at this time that because of George Floyd, we've seen football players taking the knee. Taking the knee is not a form of respect. It's just a protest, a peaceful protest in showing that people are not happy with the system and how other people are treated as inferior to the society. So in considering what has happened over the years, I think we look at movements that have arisen because of police brutality in the United States. Black Lives Matter has become emblematic to fighting the cause of racism and of police brutality. And the iconic word that works with the movement is "I can't breathe." And this was made, it came to light when Michael Brown, who was a street vendor, was pinned down by policemen. Michael Brown was a big man and he was pinned down, but as a Black person, when you face the police, the police force, you do not retaliate because you get killed. So his last words were, "I can't breathe." And for the purpose of this webinar, I'd like to remind you of these numbers: 8 minutes and 46 seconds. If you were to go through life with someone having a knee on your neck for that long, how does it affect you? How does it affect your family? How does it affect those who look like you or the young boys? Yes, apologies for that. Yes, Eric Garner would have been the first person, and Michael Brown. Thank you for that correction. How would you feel about being seen in that position and young boys knowing that they can be found in that, they can fall into that into that position, that if they were to be found by the police, they're possible to die. So it is in that light that I'll move, or the backdrop of that I'll now move on to the next slide. I don't know, do we have the poll? Okay, so we've got 93% saying it is the responsibility of everyone to tackle racism, and I believe that it's true. And now I would move to talk about the field that we're in, the field of adult education and community, so tertiary education. So what is the role with anti-racism, anti-racism research, anti-racism researchers and anti-racist learners? So we all know that, or it has come to light that global systems protect mostly white citizens and over other racial and ethnic groups. And for this, I was looking at the writings of Day and Adlund, and in every way, in terms of white privilege, is they are favored in terms of marketplace. If you go into work in Ireland, there's a preference. Your surname determines whether you're able to get a job or go into management positions. So this creation of, let's say, the ideological and cultural biases, they affect social sciences because people have been socialized to believe that that the white race is superior, and every other race is not does not take preference or is not capable of doing what society expects. So when we talk about anti-racism, what anti-racism is to me is it addresses privilege and the resulting biases that come with it, whether in terms of a person's accent, a person's background, or whether their knowledge within a field. It challenges that. It challenges the violence that is associated with Black people, and also the structures. And here mostly is how do people, ethnic minorities or people of color, that are treated within, let's say, education institutions. And I would like to pause here, and it's something that has been highlighted to me, and it relates to the traveler community or the Minkerian Island. I cannot speak on them, but they have suffered longer. I mean, they have been in Ireland for a long time, and they have spoken loudly on how they feel sidelined because of the community that they come from. So that encompassing of ethnic minorities also involves people that have been fighting, the traveler community that has been fighting for a long time to dispel these biases held against them. So in terms of anti-racist research, it places, according to Day, it places places the minoritized center of analysis and focusing on the experiences of the lived experiences of people. So in terms of research, it's when a researcher goes and says, okay, fine, I'm looking, it's not about, it's looking or understanding how their white privilege puts them in that position to do the research, rather than the lived experience of the person that could do that research. It also questions the social structures that are, sorry, I'm just looking at two screens, that oppress peoples of color and their knowledge that they gain. And this also is Day that says this. In order to facilitate anti-racist research, these values need to be challenged. And that is the white privilege that we've talked about, that happened in Central Park at the beginning of this month. So at the beginning of, I think, what is it, in June, March, March or April. I'll move to the next slide, please. So racism in adult education scholarship. So for a long time, adult education has been found to be linked to social justice and the civil rights movement. I think it's because when people go into adult education, they've had life experiences, they know what they want, and there's more dialogue between adult learners and, let's say, the lecturers or academic staff that are in that area. So there's been that link that we already know where we stand, we've read literature, we have a greater understanding of how the world works about these privileges, but it is also not immune to racism. And this like institutional racism is embedded in organizational structures. And according to Hayes and Collin, it's in the teaching strategies. We talk about the Eurocentric way of teaching, of teaching things that any other culture, or let's say Black studies, for example, in Ireland, they only started in UCD this year, and we've had a call from Trinity College asking for that to be introduced. So there isn't the admission or the taking in that there's other cultures that are now living in Ireland that also would benefit from, well, not them only, but the whole of the society would benefit from understanding the history of, let's say, African history, Caribbean history, Asian history, and that will help create scholarship in Ireland. Just in terms of a reflective point, during the past week, there's a student, a Living Cert student, she came up on Twitter that she wanted to study, she wanted to write for her project, she wanted to write on Patrice Lumumba, and her teacher, after 10 drafts of being told to change, she was told that there was nothing there to see. So she was left, she couldn't even write about that for her project. And that is a missed piece that starts off like the whole barriers to other scholarship are already closed off, even in secondary school. So as I said, sorry, beg your pardon. So we also find that within the whole spectrum, in terms of, I suppose, in graduate programs, is that admissions to postgraduate studies and retention of people of color is limited. So there is the privilege of a very few scholars can go in and say, let's say, do their PhDs, and if they do, they are not retained in the institutions. So you find that having learners that have gone through that would get their PhDs, or not be able to use them, or they have to go to other jurisdictions where they find opportunities. And this falls together in scholars that I've found that have moved to Northern Ireland, that have studied here in the Republic, or people have gone to Canada, or they've gone to the UK, mainland Britain, and gone and studied, because there's more acceptance of that. Whereas in Ireland, any chance of being able to teach or to be part of the academic structure is taken away from them. We also find that texts and articles which deal with race, and that goes back to the Eurocentric, that deal with race, white privilege, diversity, are not assigned into any of the textbooks. If you're learning, it's totally based on, let's say, European history, and there's a little reflective of the other parts, facets that bring in or that talk critically, especially the critical part of the diversity and race relations. It's a topic that is very much, as I said, it's very much not entered to. You'd rather not even talk about it and just skip over it. So that's where we start that subtle. It's not the overt, but it's covert, in that people are not allowed to explore, or they're not given opportunities to explore those areas. I'll go to the next slide, please. In asking whose role is it in tertiary education to be anti-racist? So, because I think it's Angela Davis who said that it's not enough not to be racist, but you have to be anti-racist, and that starts with the decolonization of the mind. And it is my feeling that faculty members should have a key role in combating racism and preparing learners in working more to bring texts that encompass or talk critical thinking about diversity and race relations in who they hire. I mean, there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, but if you go to most, if in Ireland you start off from primary school, that there was an article recently that there's the first Black teacher, I think she's in Wicklow. The people from ethnic minorities, Black children, they've gone through the whole school life without even seeing someone that they look like. And that goes all the way to undergrad and postgrad, that there isn't consideration to tap into that source of having diversity. It also can be done by mentoring. And this, I think, is is a bit difficult in Ireland in terms of when you want someone that understands your culture, when you talk about and understanding, okay, I've done this degree, I'm going into this field as a person, as a Black person, or as a person of Asian background, how were your experiences? Those people that can mentor you, you can be mentored from a different perspective, but you'd want to understand how are you received when you come in as the different person, and that is not fully available in Ireland, and it's something that learners have said that it would be very helpful within their education courses. Acknowledging. Here, I would like to say it's very difficult when you talk to someone about white privilege or racism. It's shunned upon as same as anything that is seen as systematic or something that makes it. So acknowledging that, yes, there is white privilege, there is conscious bias, whether from how a person was raised or how they were told to view other people, and to be able to tackle those biases in everyday living, or when we go out into our work, or when we see our students. I've spoken to learners who say, I've done third level education or even postgrad, but when I go and upskill, I'm spoken to as a child as if I don't understand English. I'm spoken to, I'm looked down upon as being a person who doesn't know, and worse, when it comes to an emphasis on accents, that a person's accent determines whether they're able to be educated. And those are the things that need to be saying, okay, fine, yes, you might not be classifying yourself as racist, but there is the conscious or unconscious bias that we all carry from our races. I mean, immigration to Ireland has been just recent. I mean, we say recent because of the figures, but that is the time to look at what we're doing and confront our personal biases and continually check ourselves on how we feel about other people. I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, so who else needs to be involved? So it's not only the job for adult education, and as the poll has shown, we have, everyone has to be involved. And I'd say, like, even within the social sciences or any other faculties, how, let's say, the medical department views the whole, or different parts of the system, everyone needs to be involved. And I'm reminded, as a rugby fan, I'm reminded of Ireland's core. Ireland, together, standing strong, shoulder to shoulder. And that's what we need to do. We are at a great point in Ireland where we've seen the mistakes or know what colonization does to people's lives. And we need to be able to stand together and try and learn from the mistakes that have happened all over the world. We can't be still standing and saying we're repeating the same mistakes. We need to involve the learners, involve them, talk to them about what their needs are. Treat, especially when it comes to adult learners, treat them as people that have experience, even if they're coming in from have the experience of living in another country. And most people that do come to Ireland on the shores and enter adult education, it's not the first time them going into education. They've had experiences that can be tapped in. So on that, I'd say, in order to have an anti-racist system, in order to have an anti-racist tertiary education, we need to start and stand shoulder to shoulder. And let's not forget that most of the adult learners would be guardians or parents, and having that knowledge shared within that cohort, it means that their children are also learning. So we are tackling that education from the beginning, that even if a person has never had that discussion, if it's learned within community education or adult or third level education, that information is shared to their children, to their families, and we work on creating a better society. Just the last point, please. The last slide. So a call to action is for everyone to stand up and promote discussions on on anti-racism and anti-oppression scholarship, and the benefits of us and noting the similarities and differences, and as well as all the benefits that this brings. And also use social media. I think now a lot of institutions are going onto social media and looking at the resources that are available between adult learners, and to share with both faculty members and graduate students on this issue. Just the last, so I'm inspired, I don't know if we have the video, but I am inspired by a video that came out on Instagram of George Floyd's young daughter, Gigi, and she said, "My dad changed the world." And I feel George Floyd, in his pain, in his last minute of crying out to his mama, he did change the world. And I hope that we all can work. I'll just play. I hope we can work and all work together and let not his legacy die, but live in our daily actions.
Change the world. He did what?
That changed the world.
Daddy changed the world.
Thank you. So that's my presentation. Daddy changed the world for Gigi. Daddy changed, George Floyd changed the world for my children. George Floyd has changed the world in our thinking. And I really thank you for your time and listening to me.